How Will America Return to Work? A Legal Perspective with Lindsey Conrad Kennedy. She's a labor and employment attorney with Eckert Seamans. Hi, Lindsey.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Good to talk to you again. Last time we talked specifically about the question of mandating the COVID-19 vaccine on the site, but I'd like to expand that discussion today. We can touch on that too, but I'd like to expand it to just talk about some of the other main legal issues that are emerging in terms of employees returning to the workplace. What are the big issues that you're dealing with right now?
Well, Bob, I think the biggest issue is if and when to return to the workplace. We're seeing employers do a variety of different things here and seeing a lot of employers really struggle with these decisions, whether to return fully in person or to some sort of hybrid atmosphere or to continue remote work indefinitely. So first and foremost, that's the biggest issue. Second to that, of course, is the issue of vaccines, whether to mandate vaccines, encourage vaccines, or allow employees to make their own decisions regarding vaccines. And hand in hand with that, of course, is how to keep employees and others safe in the workplace.
Yeah. On the question of vaccines, has there been any refinement of that thinking in the last few weeks or months since we've last spoken, based on experience that companies are actually having as they attempt to bring their employees back into the workplace?
So what we're seeing is further clarification that mandating vaccines is appropriate and allowable, provided that certain exceptions are made for certain employees with disability or religious reasons. But what we're seeing is that a lot of employers are not actually mandating vaccines. Rather, they are encouraging them or incentivizing employees to get vaccines. And on the incentivization front, just last week, the EEOC, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, issued some new and much anticipated guidance on the incentives piece, which basically paves the way, with a few caveats, for employers to incentivize employees to get the vaccine or show proof that they've been vaccinated.
Of course, these days, it sounds like in some cases they're having to incentivize employees to come back to work at all. I mean, there's,
true.
What with the employment situation being what it is right now. Then there is also the probably maybe less dire, but still as guidelines, definitely there, issues of masks and issues of testing. Are those at all controversial? It would seem to me that those would be like basic things that employers could definitely require in a workplace situation.
You'd think so, Bob, but unfortunately, there are no crystal clear answers when it comes to employment law and COVID. But you raise a really good point, especially with the masking issue. As we all know, the CDC has relaxed its rules about masking, allowing vaccinated individuals to go maskless and not follow the strict social distancing rules that we've all been so accustomed to. So the issue that employers are struggling with is how and whether to confirm which employees have actually been vaccinated such that they can forego the masks and which haven't. What many, including myself, are recommending is that employers do ask the question and take steps to confirm whether an employee has actually been vaccinated. Some employers are understandably a little hesitant to do that. It feels a little bit like an intrusive question, but at the end of the day, employers are required to provide all of their employees with a safe workplace. And the way to do that is to confirm whether your maskless employees have indeed been vaccinated. And the best way we know to do that is to require proof of vaccination. Now, the big key with that is to ask that question and not ask the follow-up questions, especially if an employee says no, they have not been vaccinated, because that's where employers can land themselves in hot water.
So on one hand, they have the slight risk of offending the employees' ideas about privacy. And on the other hand, they have the duty to ensure the safety of the workplace at large. And it would seem like the latter is probably going to prevail, right, in most cases, I would think.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. What about testing? And how often and where and when?
Yeah, we've seen employers take different approaches on that, particularly with regard to employees who are unable or unwilling to confirm that they've been vaccinated. We've seen employers continue to require testing, particularly as employees return to the office or to the workplace. So that is definitely something that is not going away anytime soon, particularly for those who have not been vaccinated.
frequency of testing, type of testing, whether the testing is particularly intrusive? Are you taking temperatures? Are you doing more invasive type of testing? Are these things being settled at all, or are they still kind of up in the air?
They're a little up in the air. We know that employers can require a lot of these things, and provided that they pay for it, make it easily available for employees. But it really depends on the particular workplace and the particular policies in place, specifically with regard to vaccinated employees, the type of work that they're doing, the frequency with which they interact with each other and with the public. So it really depends on a lot of those facts and circumstances.
How should employers, or how are employers dealing with those employees who simply refuse to come back to the office and insist on continuing to work from home?
That's
How do you deal with it?
That's a really good question, and a really tough situation for any employer to deal with. Legally speaking, the answer is that unless an employee has a specific medical reason or other legitimate valid reason for not returning, you can require employees to return to the office. And if they do not, that's considered an unexcused absence, and you can proceed accordingly under your policies, which presumably might include termination of employment. Now,
Yeah.
practically speaking, we recommend that employers explore all potential alternatives before firing an employee who doesn't want to return to the office, including by figuring out why it is exactly that the employee doesn't want to return, since that might raise some additional issues, such as, is the workplace really safe? Are employees really concerned about safety? Or maybe does that employee have a medical condition whereby an employer would need to explore accommodation?
So accommodations and exception requests definitely have to be there, but it seems a little dicey as to how to determine when to allow them and when not. There's no hard and fast rule, right?
That's correct. In that case, an employer would proceed under the standard interactive process under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, as that applies to COVID-19 situations and disabilities within that context, it's a little trickier because it is so new, but you're right that an employer would be obligated to initiate the interactive process, figure out whether the employee has a qualifying disability, and if so, whether the employer can accommodate that disability, such as, for example, by allowing the employee to continue working from home.
It's just so weird because, like, a couple of years ago, who would have thought that you coming to work was a basic requirement of having a job? I mean, and now all of a sudden it's a question. So I guess, and in your experience as a labor attorney, I guess you're on new turf too, right?
We all are, and it's exciting in many ways, scary in many ways as
Hmm.
well. But that's exactly right. And one of the issues related to that we're starting to see is employers struggle to articulate why it is that an employee has to be working in person at the workplace when so many of us have been able to work remotely for the past 14 or 15 months.
Yeah. What about this business of the so-called business liability shield that is being passed by certain states? What is the status of that, and how does that protect a business, or not protect a business for that matter, against employees getting sick on the job, or refusing to go to the job, or anything like that?
You're right. We've seen a lot of those in the news and wending their way through state legislatures. I believe over half of all states have some sort of business liability shield, either in the works or on the books. But
Mhm.
what I will caution employers is that in some ways they're more in name than anything else. Most that I've seen have carve outs for fraudulent or willful or intentional conduct by the employer. So the only thing they really protect against is something like ordinary negligence, which in
Yeah.
many states is preempted by the workers' comp system as well. So while these shield laws vary, of course, by state and jurisdiction, employers would be wise not to rely on them.
Mhm. And then there's just the basic question of ensuring employee morale. I mean, to what degree is that the responsibility of the employer? And if so, how do they do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest recommendations in that area is communication early and often, communicating with employees during the entire return to work process, including well before employees are required to return, and even well before a decision has even been made.
Yeah.
Also, I think some employers would be wise to remember to communicate the why returning to work is important. Saying something like, because we miss you, is probably not sufficient to get enough employee buy-in. So
Mhm.
communicating throughout the entire process, directing employees to certain benefits that might be available to them. For example, the employee assistance program, which maybe that will be able to help them with easing the transition, things like finding childcare, elder care, pet care. So
Mhm.
communication is key in these situations.
So because you get to keep your job is theoretically a way to do it, but maybe not the best way if you can find another way and have happy employees, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are so many ifs and questions still out there in the air. I guess the underlying thing we probably can conclude is, talk to a lawyer, right? So I'm glad I've done that today. But thank you very much again, Lindsey Conrad Kennedy of Eckert Seamans, for joining me to talk about these tough issues as we reopen the workplace in our country. Thanks again for talking to me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.